Hi, welcome to another episode of The Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I chat with Lena Nasserdeen. She is a leader in the emotional intelligence space. And although you might be thinking like, okay, we hear this word EQ, emotional intelligence, but what does it really mean? And essentially, it's really all the important things that makes us who we are, that makes us good leaders. It's from our self-awareness to how we behave, to how we communicate, to how we show up in the world, and much more. And it even will determine the level of success that you have in your life and also in your relationships, not just about business and career. And so Nada is really a kind of a leader in this space. She's been studying this topic for many, many years. She shares her own journey from kind of being a performer to then an executive to then an entrepreneur, and how emotional intelligence really played a role into all of these different transformations that she's had. She really provides some invaluable insights for anyone looking to harness their untapped potential and elevate their own emotional intelligence. So definitely tune in to hear some practical strategies for boosting your self-awareness, managing self-doubt, and showing up just more as yourself in the world. And as always, if you like this conversation, please take a moment, subscribe, like, share, and come back for more. Nada, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thank you so much, Elena. It's an honor to be here.
I cannot think of a better person to talk to today or just in these times in general, because emotional intelligence is something I think about quite often in the work that I do, but even just driving down the street, sometimes Nada, when you have the certain reactions or the road rage on the roads, and really the first thing comes to them is like, these people need some emotional intelligence of like how to manage themselves, but it's not as simple as just managing themselves in that way. So before we kind of go into the topic of emotional intelligence and the book that you wrote and all the work you're doing around it, take me back through a little bit of a snapshot of your career journey. Like, how did you get into this work, and why is it now kind of your mission?
Yeah, that's a great question, Elena. Thanks for asking. And you're totally right. I mean, emotional intelligence, like every second of every day, we are using it or not using it, right? And so it's super important and critical. And I'm glad we're going to dive into it today. So, taking you all the way back, the first career I ever had, I was actually a performer. So I used to tour the world internationally as a singer and a dancer, and I did like musical theater. And that's, I would say, Elena, where I first started to really recognize how important these skills are, soft skills. I didn't know they were called soft skills at the time. But the way that I started to understand that these were important is when I was a performer, I would walk into a room with hundreds of performers that were amazing, amazing singers and amazing dancers. And so I realized at a young age that there's got to be more to this because they could only cast 36 people on a tour. So if there's hundreds of people in a room and there's only spots for 36, but they all sing and dance amazing, how are they going to choose which 36 they're going to take? They have to go beyond the singing and beyond the dancing, meaning that the technical aspect was not enough. And so this is when I started to realize that there's got to be some other, what I call it factors, that kind of contributed to being casted. And I wanted to be one of those 36. So that's where I started to realize, okay, something was different. After performing, when I was 27, I became the executive of an education corporation. And I had 200 team members under me, Elena. And I saw the exact same thing happening. I observed the same thing. So there was all these team members that had PhDs, master's degrees, certifications, all the technical skill that they needed to be successful. But most of the employees at the time were getting in the way of their own success. They had a hard time communicating. They really struggled building a life that was fulfilling. They struggled with leadership and they got themselves in trouble. There was a lot of things that I was noticing. They had all the right degrees. They were super smart, but they really struggled with the human side of things, the soft skills. And so this is when I started to see that, okay, there's a bigger question here. What makes some people more successful than others? If I have two people that are standing in front of me and they have the same degree, the same certification, the same skill, who's going to go further, faster, and why? Same thing in the entrepreneurial world or when it comes to a company. If I have an organization, two organizations, and they both provide the same service, who's going to go further and faster and why? Is it going to be because of the customer service and the people skills and the relationship building and their ability to pivot, right? And so this is where I started to explore and kind of look at these skills. Now, something even more important happened that kind of like got me to take action. is I decided after about almost 5 years, about 4 and some change years, to resign from the company as an executive, my career, and to take a leap and to leave everything, sold my house, my car, everything, and to leave the country for an opportunity called marriage.
Mm.
And I went and I did my thing. And after 4 weeks, on the first day of our honeymoon, my husband, now ex, said that he wanted a divorce. So I lost everything. So within the matter of a couple weeks, I went from a high performing executive, 6 figures, all this stuff, to $100 and 2 luggage. That was it. I got back on a plane. I was crying. I was bawling. I was embarrassed. I was very confused. I really didn't know what was happening, heartbroken. And I started crying. I was crying so much that I fell asleep on the airplane. My father came to me in my dream. My father died when I was 27. He's only ever seen me be a performer. He's never seen me do anything else. He came to me in my dream and he said, Netta, everything you need is already inside of you. You just have to rise up for you. That's the name of the company that I built and that I built today. So I got back to California, didn't know anything about entrepreneurship, didn't know anything about coaching or training or, standing on stage and Tony Robbins and all these things. And I just started building the company. And the way that I started building the company was by asking myself, what am I good at? What do I do naturally? And what do I know? And I know that I'm good at speaking on a mic because I was a singer for a long time. I know that I'm really good at teaching because I was in education for a long time. My master's is in educational and executive leadership. My friends all told me that I was really confident and good with pushing people to build their confidence. And from all of those accumulations and my experience as a performer and an executive and seeing how much people were struggling, this is where the company was created.
Mm. That's beautiful. And I love it that you kind of went back to okay, what is it that I'm good at? What is it that people tell me that I'm good at? Because I think that's what we struggle at the most is
Yes.
we have a lot of untapped talent and potential that we don't always recognize because we don't pause to recognize. And in your case, you almost had this forced circumstance, right? That you were okay, it was just like a calling almost at that time, right?
Yes.
So it worked really well. But I'm curious, I mean, in my experience, I when I look back in my 20s, when I felt like I was a hot mess, and I look back and a lot of it was lacking emotional intelligence, but I didn't even recognize, I didn't realize that until I had to go through a lot of my own bad experiences and so on, and to where, again, I was forced. And so, and I work a lot with young talent today, and I'm thinking of how do I translate this to help them not go through that? But then is there a way, or is it just one of those life lessons that you just have to go through before you truly become emotionally intelligent?
I think it's a combination of things. There's no cookie cutter answer to learning and building emotional intelligence. I think that your childhood and your journey up until this point helps you build certain levels of emotional intelligence. So I'll give you an example. Even before I knew the word emotional intelligence, I have always been highly confident in myself. And that's an area of emotional intelligence. Self-confidence is under the first pillar of emotional intelligence. I've always been like that. And that's because of my childhood. I come from a Middle Eastern background. My parents were always very loving, and they taught my brothers and I how to be confident, all three of us. So all my brothers and I, we've never had no in our head. We always just take action because our mom and our dad, ever since we were little kids, they were you can do it. Put your best foot forward. Don't stop. And so that area of emotional intelligence I've always had, right? But then as I've gotten older, I've become more self-aware of the areas that I have and the areas that I don't have. So on the flip side, because I come from a Middle Eastern family where my dad came here with no money and he just rose above and he struggled, I empathy is not a natural thing for me.
Me neither.
Right? It's not natural for me, and which is emotional intelligence. Empathy is part of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So then that particular area, it's a struggle for me to put myself in other people's shoes, not maliciously, but just because I'm if I can do it, why can't you? Figure it out. But that obviously we know that as leaders today and in today's world, like that kind of energy and that attitude doesn't work. And so I had to learn how to build that specific competency. So I think when it comes to building emotional intelligence, the most important aspect is first understanding what are the areas that you're good at naturally, because maybe your childhood has helped you build it. For example, resilience. Some people that grew up in a tough childhood and they had a lot of trauma, they have like a lot of resilience. Like they can overcome anything. And other people that had a more passive childhood that had a lot of coddling, if one thing happens to them, they crumble and they can't manage themselves. So the first thing is understanding like, where am I at from a base standpoint when it comes to EQ?
Yeah, and I mean, I think just that awareness of it is difficult on its own for a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
It's difficult for people because a couple of reasons, Elena. One is we have so much consumption every single day entering our space, right? Social media, TV, what we see, what we hear, people have energies, right? So we have all of this stuff coming into our brain, and most people don't take the time to have silence and space. And so now imagine as a person, all day, every day, there's stimulation in your mind, but you don't have any time to just sit without stimulation so that you can actually be self-aware. So most people are on autopilot and they're in reactive mode. They don't even have the space or the time to have conversations with themselves, which is why that self-awareness is lacking. They're constantly in like this jerking mode of like, go, go, go. And so
Mhm.
they don't have time to catch a thought, or they don't have time to sit with themselves and ask themselves tough questions. And that's got to happen.
Absolutely. And I think it's just hard because a lot of times, like your whole life might fall apart when you start facing some of those questions. I mean,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Elena, because you're bringing up a good
Yeah.
point here.
No, I was just again just reflecting on my own experience. And I think a lot of people I talk to in my life, share similar experiences where at some point you have to realize that you are, especially when you attract bad relationships or opportunities that you feel like, okay, maybe I deserve a little bit more, but you start to realize that you're the common denominator there, and you're like, oh, well, maybe I need to start thinking differently. And for me, it was a lot of that confidence piece. Although I also come from a very kind of like, I'm from Russia originally, and it's a very harsh upbringing.
Yeah.
I still struggle with empathy. So to me, but also we grew up in this area where it's like nothing is ever good enough, but not in a such bad way. It's just how we are in Russia. Like it's this competitive, continuous competition. So it's almost like it was meant to be for our own good, but it backfired on me. I think in some aspects is because I'm like I never felt like I was good enough for the longest time. Like only now, like in my 30s, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I have something going on. But it's a real conversation, and it's hard. And it took me many years to face myself and be like, oh, to your point, it's coming from that childhood experience, but then it's so difficult to overcome it. And I still have that imposter syndrome. And I know it's something you talk a bit about in your book as well. So I'm curious about your reaction to that.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. A lot of time, because this work is not easy. It's hard work because when you do the work, there are things that come up. Because in order for you to build self-confidence and emotional intelligence, you have to ask yourself why. Why do I believe this? Why am
Hmm.
I behaving this way? Why is my life doing these things? Like, why am I attracting these things? Right. So, in order for you to evolve, you have to educate yourself on like what's happening around you. And that's going to require you to ask some really tough questions that some of us are just not ready to face. But I
Yeah.
always say this, um, secrets make you sick. So a lot of times people think that they're doing themselves a service by like just kind of bottling it and not like dealing with some of the belief system that they have. But you got to remember that when you don't have these conversations with yourself and when you don't let some of these things out of your body, they stay in your body and they actually become a part of you, right? And I really believe that that's why a lot of times people have pain in their joints or they get sick, God forbid, because all of these thoughts and beliefs that are holding them back, if they don't release them and start to have conversations and coach themselves around them, there's nowhere to go but inside physically. And so I think it's important to ask yourself, like, everything is going to be hard. Having conversations with yourself is going to be hard. Staying stuck in a life that you're not proud of is going to be hard, right? Coaching yourself through self-confidence and like the belief systems that you have, and maybe possibly bringing back old trauma is going to be hard. Not taking action and building a life that just doesn't feel fulfilling, or not growing the business that you want, or not climbing the career ladder, or building a happy relationship with your partner is also going to be hard. And so I'm sure you've heard this phrase, you just have to choose your hard.
Yeah, no, it's spot on, and it's for some people it's easier said than done, and I'm sympathetic to that, but also like there's certain things that you can do, and I agree we don't spend enough time like even quieter. So like what's a practical thing somebody can do? Like let's say they're listening to this and they're like, okay, maybe I need a reality check with myself. Like what's like one thing they can do?
The first thing they need to do is just commit. There's no secret sauce. It's just most people are interested. Only a few people are committed. The difference between interested and committed, interest is a thought, commitment takes action. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, yeah, like I don't even have 5 minutes to sit in silence with myself. I'm always on the go. I'm like heading towards burnout and I constantly feel like I'm doing stuff for other people. The first thing to do is commit to time with yourself, even if it's 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Even if it's 10 minutes that you're going to commit, and nobody is going to take that away from you. Like, listen, I work out at least 5 days a week, right? And I'm committed to that. Every day on like Saturday or Sunday, I will do my planner for the whole week and I will input my workout time. Now, when people come to me and they say, hey, we need to book a meeting at this time, it's a simple answer. I'm sorry, I'm already booked. I'm committed to that, you see? And so they don't need to know why. They don't need to know what I'm doing, but I'm committed to that because it's for myself.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage you, if you're listening, do the same thing. Put a 15-minute meeting on the books with yourself with no phone, no stimulation, no like nothing in front of you that you're playing with, and just sit in silence. It's not even that you need to meditate, because meditating is hard for me, but I just sit in silence and that's it. And then like whatever thoughts come into my mind, I observe them and I think about them, or, like I'll watch my dog run around, or I allow myself to come down off of that overstimulated energy that we all have, so that I can get into a place where more self-awareness can come up to the front. But if we don't commit to that 15 minutes and we let people jump into that 15 minutes, then it's going to be this constant rat race and this constant cycle that it's going to be really hard for us to get off of.
It's so valid and so practical, and it's free, and anybody has access to it.
Anyone.
It's just
Yeah.
I like the commitment piece, absolutely. So you've coached thousands of individuals, and I'm sure you've seen some themes about how it actually impacts performance. Between people who commit to certain things, right, and those who just kind of like go with the flow or just never address those issues. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can go into this for quite a bit around how a lack of emotional intelligence can impact your capacity to serve, to lead, to communicate, anything, right? To perform. I'll start with self-confidence because it's the easiest to digest right now. So most people don't recognize, especially in the workplace, that the reason why they're not being seen, being heard, and being relevant, the reason why they're not growing in their career, the reason why their leadership isn't making the impact is because their self-confidence is struggling. And when your self-confidence struggles, your capacity to communicate and lead will struggle. So let me just give you like 3 quick examples that we hear a lot. I love my job, but every time I'm in a meeting, I go to raise my hand to say something, and then I end up not saying it because I'm afraid they're going to think I'm stupid or dumb. Okay? So then they don't end up saying what they want to say. And the result of that is that they don't get seen, they don't get heard, and they haven't been able to like create a space from themselves in the company that establishes them as a thought leader. That's like one small example, okay? Let's do another example. I'm leading a team of 25 people, but I feel like these people are not engaged and they don't listen to me. I think they look down on me because I speak a different language or because I'm too young. And so therefore I treat them with negative energy, or I'm short with them, or I just expect them to know. Okay. So all those beliefs impact their capacity to communicate. Let's talk about a sales team member. I work for this company, or even an entrepreneur. I work for myself, or I work for this company. And I know that I should be making cold calls. I know that I should be doing videos, online so that people can see me. but I'm afraid of what people are going to think. I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid that they're going to say no. And so then I procrastinate and I kick and scream internally and I don't do what I need to do. So then it impacts my performance, which impacts my ability to get results.
Mm, that's so solid. And you know what's interesting? And people listening to this and they're probably like, "That's really emotional intelligence," and it is. And I think that's the I don't know, the mistake, the misconception about emotional intelligence, because it's
100%.
so ingrained and like engraved into everything of who we are, from how we communicate to all those things. So excellent points, excellent examples. Very well. I see this every day in my work, in the
Yeah,
work
and
that I
like
do.
yeah, and that's why I love emotional intelligence, and it's also become a buzzword that most people don't understand, and that's why I
Yeah.
like talking about it, because if I were to break it down very, very simply for people really fast, emotional intelligence has, like, think of it as a tree, and it has four big branches. The first branch is self-awareness. The second branch is self-management. These two branches have to do with just you. It's like, are you aware of yourself and how do you manage yourself? Okay. And then the other two branches are social awareness and leadership. And these two branches have to do with other people. Now, every one of those branches, those four branches, they also have a bunch of leaves on them. And those leaves are the competencies. So, for example, on the self awareness branch, which is the first pillar, it's the first branch of the tree, you have an emotional intelligence leaf, an emotional awareness leaf. You have a blind spot leaf called accurate self assessment, and you have your self confidence leaf. Those three leaves live on the self awareness branch.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to your self-management branch and you have 6 leaves on the self-management branch, right? And then you go to your social awareness branch and you have 3 leaves. And then your leadership branch has another 6 leaves. And all of those leaves represent competencies, everything from self-confidence to how you coach your team and how you influence people, the full gamut.
So since you mentioned the self ident what's the word, not the self awareness, but self
Accurate
yeah,
self-assessment.
accurate self assessment. I think there was a
Yep.
report recently, and especially for leaders, right? Leaders
Yes.
often lack that. It seems there was like a report, and they asked the leaders, "Do you think how self aware are you?" And they're like 80% are like, "Oh, I'm super self aware." And then they did like a test or an assessment or something, and turned up like 15 or 20% of them actually self aware. So, and I
Yes.
think what are your thoughts on kind of why that happens, especially in leadership roles? And then how do you overcome that as a leader if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't even know, because a lot of people don't tell you how it really is once you're in that position. They're a little bit intimidated by you, right?
Yeah, so you're referring to the Harvard Business Review, and they asked thousands of leaders. 95% of leaders think they're self-aware, only 10% actually are.
Mm.
Okay. So that's why accurate self-assessment is on the first branch, right? And it's one of the first leaves, because it's hard for you to make change if you don't know what to change, right? And so the first thing that you need to do as a leader is you need to have the courage to get feedback. And you need to be able to get feedback from a 360 point of view, meaning that not only are you getting feedback from the people you serve, but you're getting feedback from the people that are next to you and the people that are above you. So, for example, in our company, Rise Up For You, when we work with leaders, it's really important that we show them the results of growth. Every time we coach, every time we work with a company, train a team, it doesn't matter. We do an emotional intelligence assessment in the beginning. And the individual has to score themselves on these leaves that I just talked about, right? And then they need to give that same assessment to 7 to 10 people anonymously in the company that, again, is above them, works besides them, and that they serve underneath them. And those scores will come in anonymously. And from there, we're able to put the scores side by side, the ones that they did of themselves and the one that the team did, so that we can see how accurate they are. So most leaders, yes, they give themselves a lot of 9s and 10s. And every time I see that, I'm like, here we go, because I know that the results are not going to be that. And then usually the results come in and they're 6, 7, 5s, sometimes 4s,
Yeah.
because the leader thinks that they're more evolved than they are in these certain areas. And then their team is like, no, 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 like these are some challenges. But the great thing about this is that if a leader, believes in something bigger than themselves, they will look at that data and they will say, data doesn't lie. Like, data doesn't lie. If I have my entire team giving me a 6 in empathy and I gave myself a 10, The reality is that I'm probably not as empathetic as I think I am. And so we do that in the beginning, and then we use that as a tool to coach them in the areas where they need the most coaching. And then we do it at the end again to see where they've grown. By the way, this is how I know that empathy is a challenge for me, because every year I do this assessment with my team, and every year empathy is the lowest score. Now it grows every year, it gets better, which is good, right? Because we use the same tools. But I have tens in confidence for my team, and then I have like a 7.5 in empathy, and I'm like, okay, like obviously I got to keep working on that.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm very much relate. That's like my, I'm just like, let's just get this done. Like we'll
Yeah,
talk about everything, feelings and everything else later. Like,
yeah.
if we even get to that. So like it's like really just anyway, but I think it comes from my childhood, is probably, as you mentioned, comes from yours. So I'll blame my parents on that one. It's their fault. Um, Anyway, so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit of kind of you've built a successful career, you have this global impact. What are some things that keeps you motivated to keep going? I already see your energy. You're super energetic. You're a high performer, high achiever. Like what is it that keeps you motivated?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's nothing really external. So like I'm not motivated by money. I'm not motivated by toys and that kind of stuff. What I'm motivated by is just life, faith, and gratitude. I watched my parents pass away. I buried them when I was young, and that in itself is motivating for me. It's like, okay, what does it mean to live a life here? I don't know what it means to live a life here, but all I know is that I want to commit to dying empty. So God forbid, if I don't wake up tomorrow, I want to make sure that when I go to bed tonight, that I'm like super proud of what I did today and what I've done up until this point. And so that's what drives me, what motivates me. And I just do the things that I love. I love teaching. I love emotional intelligence. I truly believe that these skills are the skills that impact the world, that impact people. And I just double down on it every day. And that's really the thing that drives me. I mean, I like the money and stuff too, but I've also not had money and I was still driven. You see what I mean? So
Yep.
I know that that's not the factor that motivates me. I know the factor that motivates me is like, we're put on this planet to help elevate the human condition, and I want to do everything I can while I'm here to make that happen.
Mm. Yeah, I'm going to believe that eventually, even if people are motivated by money, you just hit a burnout because it's not feeding your soul. And I
Yeah.
think that's so. I think if you had doing something that fulfills you, I think money is just a part of it and just comes. It's just what. But I think that what drives you is that fulfillment. Yeah, I'm with you there. And what is the biggest risk you think you've taken in your career and business so far?
I think the biggest risk I've taken is the business.
The business. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just starting the business. I mean, I had no money. I literally had nothing. I had like putting food on the table. I was getting my groceries at like the 99-cent store, you know what I mean, to eat. And I did it. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna double down and I'm gonna trust God. I'm gonna trust, myself, and I'm just gonna move forward. And I could have like ended up in a different circumstance, but I didn't allow myself to. I was like, nope, I'm gonna do this. And, up until now, that's the biggest risk.
And if somebody's listening to this and they're like, this sounds amazing, I want to be fulfilled, I want to be intrinsically motivated, but I'm a little bit afraid. Like they might know where they want to go, but they might just be afraid to take the next step. Maybe they're not sure how to take it. Like, what do you recommend they start with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something that's a little bit harsh, and that is like, who cares? Who cares if you're afraid? Like,
Hmm.
that's the empathy that I'm like not tapping into right now. You know what I mean? It's like everyone's afraid. I mean, I was afraid too, and there's moments where I'm still afraid, but you don't, it's important to understand that your feelings are valid and your feelings are important, but they shouldn't make all the decisions for you. Because if
Hmm.
you listen to every feeling that you have, you're probably going to punch people in the face every day, right? Like, how
Yeah.
many times have you had the feeling where you're like, I just want to like punch this person, but you're not going to follow that feeling, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
not going to serve you. And so I think it's important to understand that there are going to be feelings that are scary, that put fear into you because it's uncertain. And that's like a natural part of the human condition. Like, if you can't see what's in front of you, you get scared. But at the same time, what's scarier? Is it
Hmm.
more scary to take steps forward and take action, or is it more scary to live a life that's stuck and unfulfilled? And at the end of the day, you just like don't feel like you're living a good life. Which one would you rather have? I would rather charge forward and make a bunch of mistakes than sit in my bed and wake up every morning feeling miserable and unfulfilled, like I'm not doing what I want to do.
Yeah. I have a quote that I live by. It's on my whiteboard. It says, have fear, but don't have doubt. So, like, no matter what it is, like, I might be scared to do something, but I never doubt myself. I just do my best to, like, just to move through that fear. And if I do doubt myself, just moving through.
Yeah.
Um, you've shared stage with, Tony Robbins and Adam Grant. Both are some of my favorite authors and kind of thought leaders out there. What are some things you've learned from them?
Yeah, so let me clarify. When I share stage with them, I actually don't like get to stand on stage with them. So it's like we spoke at the same conference, for example, right? But let me talk about Tony Robbins a little bit more because I guess I've studied him more than I've studied Adam Grant. Um, the thing that I appreciate about Tony Robbins is that his whole, I would say, identity and service is around helping other people really take ownership. It's taking ownership. And
Mm-hmm.
I always say that life does not discriminate. So, and he brings this out beautifully in the work that he does, is that every single person, it doesn't matter what gender you are, what race you are, what country you're from, how much money you make, every single person gets kicked in the face multiple times by life. You're like constantly getting punched. You lose money. You go through divorce. You go through breakups. You lose people in your life. Challenges happen. You get in fights. God forbid you have health challenges. So, like, if it's not one thing, it's the next thing, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have full ownership of how you are going to respond to what life gives you. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that I see with Tony Robbins is that he has this like bleeding heart for all these people around the world. But at the end of the day, he always turns it back and says, but now what? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how long do you want to sit there or do you want to take that pain and use it as fuel for growth? The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I think is really important with emotional intelligence, and anybody that's listening to this that runs a business, I think this is really important. Always study the ones that are better than you, that are way ahead of you. So not only do I like what Tony Robbins says, but we're also in similar industries with kind of different things. I study the heck out of him. Like, what's he doing that made him the way that he is? What kind of research is he doing? You know what I mean? What kind of things is he talking about? What's his energy like on stage? Because that, like, he's the GOAT when it comes to personal and professional development. It would be silly for me not to observe and study him like to the best of my ability.
I love that. I'm also, I always recommend people like biographies. I'm like, look at people's biographies, like how they live, how do they overcome challenges.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite things. Beautiful. Before I ask you my last question, where can people get in touch with you? Where they can follow you, your work?
Thank you. Thank you. So the company is called Rise Up For You, completely spelled out. And you can go to our website, riseupforyou.com. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. If you go to the website, riseupforyou.com, and you go to the free button, it says free resources up top. There's the two quizzes that I was talking about. You can take the confidence quiz and the emotional intelligence quiz completely free. It doesn't cost you anything. You just click on it, and then you can see like where you are in these areas to start growing. You can also follow and connect with me personally, Lena Nasserdeen, on Instagram and LinkedIn is where I spend my time, and I run my own social media. So if you want to ask me personally a question, Rise Up For You, we have 20 team members, so you might get someone else. But if you want to talk to me specifically, send me a message on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I'll be the one to answer you.
Awesome. And the last question I ask all of my guests, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
That's a really good question. I think the one question I wish people would ask themselves more often is, how am I showing up in the world? And is it making an impact or is it taking away from other people? Because we don't realize the power of our presence. And so there's way too many people that show up in the world as if they don't matter. And they don't realize that everything they do, the words that come out of their mouth, the behavior, the way they walk into a room, it's either taking away from people or it's adding to people.
Well, thank you for showing up here today and adding lots of value to my audience and to me as well. I mean, every time this topic is, I've learned it for so long, and every time I'm just learning more and more. And you brought some excellent points, and I'll make sure to include everything that you mentioned in the show notes. I think people can definitely benefit from the free quizzes. I'll actually take one myself. I like to take these assessments like
Yeah.
every year. I don't know if you do it. I do it for fun every year. I'm like, where am I this year?
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
but thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Elena.